Welcome back, Cubs. Direwolf here. And today I want to talk to you about the Young Turks and the false narrative that the belief in science is divided along the lines of conservative and liberal. Whereas many on the liberal media would like you to think that conservatives do not believe in science and that liberals are very pro-science, I'm going to prove to you that there are people who believe in science and the scientific method on both sides, and there are people who completely disregard the scientific principles and the information that's been learned through it on both sides.
This Saturday is the March for Science, where thousands of scientists and their pro-science supporters are going to be marching in cities across the country and some in other countries as well.
I feel the goals of this event were very positive. They tried to raise awareness of and interest in science and how it is important to our society while trying to remain politically neutral. And it is very important that science remains politically neutral because the goal of science should be to find objective fact, not to reinforce biases.
The main march in Washington will feature speakers including Mona Hanna-Attisha, the pediatrician who blew the whistle on the water crisis in Flint, Michigan originally, science educator Bill Nye, as well as other hosts and performers. It's going to begin with a rally, and it's very important because the moves that we've seen from the administration so far have been not even just normal Republican, aggressively anti-science.
Being a conservative or being a Republican has nothing to do with believing in scientific principles. Many on their aggressive left would like you to believe that conservatives do not believe in science. And to justify this claim, they point to how some conservatives do not believe in evolution or totally man-caused climate change, despite the fact that there are also liberals who do not believe in evolution or climate change being caused by humans as well. The belief or even the understanding of science is not a left or right issue. There have been plenty of conservatives who have stood in the way of progress because of their lack of belief in science. However, far more liberals have done the same thing. It was liberals who opposed nuclear power, which produces far more power for almost no waste. A nuclear power plant produces no CO2 and no air pollution, only water vapor, and only creates between 20 and 30 tons of physical waste, much of which can be recycled to create more power. And coal-powered power plants, which produce the majority of our power other than nuclear, produce 125,000 tons of ash every year, as well as producing CO2 into the atmosphere, and 193,000 tons of physical waste, sludge, that cannot be recycled. The less very unscientific opposition to and demonization of nuclear power has done more damage to our environment than any Republican policy has ever done. It is the regressive left that opposes GMOs that produce much healthier foods with much higher yields. A scientific discovery that's very important and necessary to feed our ever-growing population. The regressive left demonized them and said that GMOs are dangerous despite 900 individual studies worldwide that showed that they are safe. Chances are some of you that are currently watching this video still believe that frankenfoods or GMOs are unhealthy for you, but those claims are not scientific and have been debunked. It is another example of liberal pseudoscience and liberal media working together to spread misinformation that likely 50% of you believe. It is the regressive left that places feelings before facts when they say that you can be transracial, trans-species, trans-able. They are the ones that ignore medical science when they push homeopathic medicine, which has been debunked, and when they say that you can be healthy at any weight. Regressive leftist pseudo-medical science and the body positivity movement fly in the face of true medical science. There are many people on the left that do believe in science, but there's also many more people on the left that do not believe in science and pour money into programs that are not scientifically sound, like the water seer and solar roadways. But the problem and the blame does not lie with the average person on the left or the right who's been fooled into believing the regressive left's pseudoscience. The problem lies with the fake intellectuals who try to hide their advocacy for regressive principles under a very thin veil of scientific research. There are a lot of people on the left and the right who do not believe in or do not understand science. But what is clear is, being on the left does not mean you're pro-science, and being on the right does not mean you're anti-science.
But the amount of defunding is beyond what I even feared would happen.
What he's referring to is the defunding of regulatory agencies in the government bureaucracy like the EPA. These agencies hire lots of scientists and eat up lots of government money. However, because they've grown so big and lacked proper oversight, they've led to overregulation that has destroyed a lot of American jobs. Because of this, Trump has suggested a 35% cut to the budget and a refocusing of their mission on actual environmental issues. The cutting of the budget of the EPA and other such agencies is not a denial or rejection of science. It is identifying that the agency has grown too big and wasteful and that the money needs to be redirected elsewhere, especially when we have a deficit.
March for Science organizers have framed the march as a, quote, celebration of science and a nonpartisan opportunity to defend the role science plays in the global community.
I find it so funny that the organizers of this event tried so hard to show that they were nonpartisan and that they just cared about showing people that science should be important to everyone because science is so important to our progression as a society. It is so important. Every aspect of our lives has been improved by scientific development. And the organizers of this event want to be very inclusive with their language, but what you're about to say is very divisive and exclusive.
There's an undercurrent of some partisanship because both parties don't treat scientists the same way, but they don't want to turn people off. The issues that they investigate and work on and we'll be discussing at this march have consequences for all of us.
Yes, scientific discovery does have consequences for all of us on the left and the right, but you are trying to demonize the right as not being supportive of scientific discovery, and you are falsely associating that left are all supportive of scientific discovery. To a true scientist or someone who's truly pro-science, politics does not matter. The truth and the evidence matter. You calling all conservatives and Republicans anti-science is a meaningless pejorative with no more meaning than calling them a Nazi or a racist or a homophobe. And even though you'll find that the regressive left often call their detractors Nazis, racist, and anti-science, you'll find that some of the most racist, Nazi-esque, and anti-science people you will ever find are on the regressive left.
Yeah, I was wondering why they bothered. Are there any Republican scientists left?
A recent survey of scientists resulted in 9% saying they were conservative, 52% saying they were liberal, and 39% saying they were independent or declined to answer. This disparity of scientists who identify as conservative and liberal exists for a couple of different reasons. As you know, those who go through the sciences require lots of college education, and our college campuses are very anti-conservative. They spend a long time being educated in a very liberal environment that's very hostile to conservatives. Second, after their education, even conservatively minded scientists don't want to be associated with the negative anti-science stigma that's often labeled on conservatives. So for fear of being ostracized, many would rather say that they are independent than say they are conservative. There may still be more liberal scientists than there are conservative, but there are still many conservative scientists, and the love of science is not held only by liberals. And even among those liberals, not all of them are in complete agreement about big issues like climate change.
Or are there any scientists left who are still Republicans?
Yeah.
Yes, there are many Republican scientists, and not all of them are opposed to global warming or evolution like you try to claim they are. I am a conservative, and I understand that the Earth's climate has always been changing and will continue to change. I accept the fact that the makeup of the gases in our atmosphere directly relate to our climate. However, I, like most of the liberal and conservative science, don't believe there is enough evidence to say exactly how much of it is caused by humans. Not if it is affected by humans, but by how much it is affected by humans. And will it be catastrophic?
It is super important. I mean, we're looking at potential cuts to the EPA, like a blanket 31%, huge amount of their actual workers being cut, 18% cut to the NIH. We're talking about entire graduating classes of graduate students going into the sciences and having effectively, under the current plan, possibly no funding to go towards their work.
The US government is not the only employer of scientists and not the only funder of scientific research. There are many universities, private companies, and international companies that fund scientists and their research. The US government has been spending many billions of dollars on scientists and their research, and it is also spending money it does not have. At some point, the US government has to make cuts. The federal government is not the sole provider for scientists and their research, and even with the cuts, will still be providing billions and billions of dollars to this research.
That affect obviously climate change. I mean, that's the big one, but we're talking about medicine, we're talking about technology and development. I mean, this is the amount that these cuts, the damage that it can do to technology and science going forward, it's difficult to overstate it. And that's why it's so important that this is going on and that people show support for it.
In the technology and medical fields, there's a huge profit incentive. And that's why there's multi-billion-dollar companies that produce both medicine and technology. If the government spends less time and money on technology and medical development, if there is a need, the private sector will pick up the slack. And the private sector will most likely be far more efficient, producing the same quality with less time and less money.
I am just waiting to see the right-wing reaction to this march tomorrow. The way that Fox News will address it, the way that Breitbart and Drudge and all them, I mean, they despise exactly these sorts of people, the academics and the scientists.
Conservatives and Republicans as a whole are not opposed to academics and scientists. What they are opposed to, like most traditional liberals, is fake scientists and fake academics going out and making scientific claims that are false, like when Bill Nye goes out and says that gender is a spectrum and that there are more than 2 genders. The response from conservatives and liberals alike was not anti-science, it was actually pro-science and saying, no, science says there's 2 genders. Both conservatives and liberals in this argument are pro-science. It is the liberal Bill Nye who is anti-science by saying that it's a spectrum.
There's going to be a level of vitriol that I think is going to be absolutely disgusting. But these are people who are literally fighting not just for their own careers, but for the continuation of our way of life.
I'm willing to bet the conservative response to the March for Science will be nothing close to the vitriol that comes from the social justice crowd. Nor will it be as patently anti-science as social justice and third-wave feminism, which are both on the authoritarian left. But just because they're on the left, it doesn't mean that everyone else on the left shares their same beliefs. Just like there are some conservatives that are anti-science, it doesn't mean that all conservatives are anti-science.
And if you think I'm overly politicizing it, so yeah, that's not fair. There's a lot of Republicans in favor of science. Well, no, they're, in the case of climate change, let alone many others, they're literally against 97% of the world's scientists.
The figure that 97% of scientists believe in human-caused global warming comes from one paper that's already been debunked and has been peer-reviewed by other climate scientists and found to be flawed in both its data and its conclusion. The short story behind this figure is that an Australian man named John Cook published a paper in 2013 at the University of Queensland. The paper documented a study wherein 2 climate activists, not scientists, reviewed 12 to 13,000 published climate articles. These published climate articles were scientific studies, but most of them were not related to the question of whether or not global warming is man-caused. An example would be several studies on the populations of pandas and polar bears and how they've been affected by climate change so far, not whether or not humans are causing climate change. Those reading the articles did not read the entirety of the articles, but only small parts of them. In one case, one person reviewing the articles supposedly read through 500 full-length studies within a 24-hour period, which is impossible. What they actually did was take any article that claimed that climate change was real and then said that it was also saying that it was man-caused by more than 50%. Also, they did not check to make sure that the articles that they gathered were actually representative of the entire discipline. You see, because 13,000 articles is nowhere near how many articles have been published on climate science. Also, Cook's article's eventual conclusion was that out of the 13,000 articles, 95% of the articles claimed that climate change was man-caused. That's very different than saying 97% of all scientists. It was only 97% of the 13,000 articles that were reviewed. Cook knew his study was flawed, and that's why he was determined not to have it peer-reviewed. He held back all the evidence and data from his study, and it was only ever released after a hacker broke into the University of Queensland and released it to the public. After the information was released, it was properly peer-reviewed, and it was found that out of the 13,000 articles, only 41 of them expressly said that climate change was 51% or more caused by humans. Many of the scientists who had published articles that Cook had claimed falsely had supported the idea of man-caused climate change by above 31%, spoke out against Cook and his study, saying that he had misunderstood or misrepresented their articles. It is true that the vast majority of scientists do believe that climate change exists. However, the claim made in Cook's article that 97% of the articles that were reviewed said that climate change was 51% or more caused by humans is incorrect and based on flawed data. And it's also very far from saying that 97% of all scientists agree that climate change is predominantly caused by humans, and says nothing to their opinions of how severe the effects of climate change will be. My point isn't to say that I know how much of climate change is caused by humans. I do believe that human interaction does affect climate change. The point is that there is no consensus, and the consensus that they're speaking about, saying that 97% of scientists agree, is based on false data, and even if it were accurate, science is not based on consensus, it is based on truth. The conservative climate scientists also agree that climate change exists. There are plenty of conservatives that can see that CO2 is rising and that there is a corresponding raise to the temperature of the Earth. They aren't denying this science. However, the reason why liberals and conservatives in the scientific community are not in agreement how much of the climate is being changed by humans is because climates are very complicated and have many more factors than just CO2. Debating the cause of climate change is not anti-science. However, knowingly producing a deeply flawed and misleading article is anti-science. And when the Young Turks misrepresent the false conclusion from an inaccurate study that's been debunked multiple times during peer review, they are doing no favors to science.
Yeah.
Then you might be against science.
Yeah, and if you vote for people who are publicly against it, you're against it by default.
Now, obviously, I don't speak for all conservatives, but I am a conservative. I know there's many people like me. And I value science in the pursuit of knowledge. And I don't see science as being a political thing. Science should be about truth. I do value putting money into the research of how we affect our environment. But no matter what we decide to do, I'm not willing to completely dismantle our society for an incremental change that will do nothing to stop the natural course of nature. But where we can improve our technology to produce a cleaner, more healthy environment, I am all for it. As for the argument that conservatives and Republicans are anti-science, that statement is completely false. There are people who deny science and do not believe in the scientific principles on both the left and the right. Science is and should remain non-partisan. Direwolf out. Thank you so much for watching, Cubs. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. If this is your first time watching one of my videos and you liked it, please subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Also, I've opened up the Direwolf merchandise store. Check the link in the description of the video if you want to see some of the cool Direwolf swag. All of the art used on the merchandise was done by the artist named Retro Hyena. Her contact information will be linked in the description of the video. Direwolf out.